Jeremy, you grew up in New Zealand, far from NYU, United States, where you now live and work. Does that give you a particular take on the world and international affairs, growing up in a small country, far distant from major centres of power and population?
It does, I think, in the following way, that New Zealand is a highly civilized country, and in its foreign policy and in its politics, it cannot throw its weight around. It cannot coerce anybody except some minor Pacific Island territories. If it has influence in the world, it has influence by virtue of the example of its own laws and its participation in the legal enterprise and in the institutions of the world. It was a founder member of the United Nations. We use the metaphor of punching above its weight. It punches above its weight in the international community, but it does so by virtue of its manifest, deep and professional commitment. It's taking for granted international law as a basis of foreign policy.
And that's, in a way, almost you breathed the air growing up. That shaped your own outlook.
I believe so. It's hard to reflect accurately on one's own upbringing, of course, but it's palpable in the way that the country is organized and in the things that are said and what you are taught at school. You learn about the United Nations, you learn about treaties of one sort or another. Your country may still be involved in some shameful enterprises. We were involved in the Vietnam War, for example, but it was under the auspices of treaty obligations, the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, the Australian, New Zealand and United States treaty arrangements. And we were brought up thinking about treaties, thinking about international law, thinking about alliances, thinking about contributions that we made in the world. So that was, as I say, it was palpable in the politics and thinking of the country.
The other influence you bring from your childhood is your own Christian faith. And in this working group, there's been a seamless discussion that has brought in legal theory, political theory, philosophy, with biblical and theological concerns and concepts, thinking about the ordering of our common life internationally. But also people have spoken about their own personal faith motivation and held the two together. That's not typical of the academy we both know and the secular universities we've both worked and taught in. That's a tension. How has the centre informed that connection in your life through this working group?
I grew up in an Anglican vicarage. My father was a rather conservative, almost old-fashioned English vicar, if you can imagine the atmosphere of an English vicarage transplanted mysteriously to the other side of the world. So he was a very learned man, and the faith was a connection between the effortless liturgical dailiness of Anglican life and a very deep commitment to philosophy and thought in my father's own education and in his own preaching and witness. So all of that is present, and I mean all of it. The liturgy, in a sense, is as important as the example of wisdom and thinking. At the center, I'm suddenly in an atmosphere and around a table where the ability to explore that heritage and map it onto difficult and demanding questions about law and obligation and rights and dignity is suddenly affirmed, as you said, seamlessly and effortlessly by people around the table. The affirmation is effortless, the work isn't effortless, the work is very difficult and demanding, as I've said now several times. But it is taken for granted in the room when I'm working with Robin and Mary Ellen and yourself and the other 8 or 9 members of the group. It is taken for granted that you can draw on your biblical, liturgical, doctrinal heritage. Marry that with an understanding of philosophy, marry that with the understanding of law, and bring those connections to bear in discussion, and listen to what the theologians tell you and the international lawyers tell you, and make the connections. It works wonderfully, and the centre provides a glorious housing for that enterprise. As I say, I don't think it's an anomaly in the world anymore, but nevertheless it is a uniquely nurturing environment.
You teach and lecture in the great universities of the world, and this is a very tiny little institution in one of the world's intellectual capitals, Princeton. If you had a hope, an ambition for the center, given your concerns, what do you think this little center, an ecumenical institution for advanced scholarship, what can we contribute to that wider academic world?
To first of all be what you are, and to nurture small-scale conversations, because the depth of the connections that can be established among 8 or 10 or a dozen people far outweigh the influence of rather more shallow connections that can be established among 100 people, particularly when the 8 or 10 or 12 people are themselves returning to their own positions elsewhere in the academy. They're engaging themselves in other conversations, they're organizing other conferences, they are working as public intellectuals and as professional scholars in other ways. So they are taking out into the world what has been nurtured and built here. I don't see that the centre wants to depart very much from this model. I do think it is unique the way that our working group has engaged, has been not just ecumenical in a theological and doctrinal sense, but it's been ecumenical in a broader sense of bringing people together from genuinely other disciplines. We're all men and women of faith, but half our members are not theologians, and they would not ordinarily find themselves in a theological conversation sustained in the way that we have sustained it. The centre's commitment to encourage working groups of that caliber and of that character, I think has been a huge achievement. It doesn't happen elsewhere. Normally the tendency would be not to make it interdisciplinary for fear of diluting the conversation and fear of diluting the results. Somehow, and this is under your leadership, somehow we've managed to make it interdisciplinary as well as ecumenical without sacrificing, in my view, any element of depth.
Jeremy Waldron, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Will.